Stories of Transformation is a show dedicated to the voices of social justice movements.
We bring to you guests who are engaged in making a difference in the lives of those who are forgotten.
We are committed to finding solutions which make people safe and communities thrive.
We believe that people have powerful stories about personal transformation.
When shared, these stories begin a process of healing.
Welcome to Boona Presents and to Stories of Transformation. Today we're going to spend some time talking with two folks in the community whose work is very well known in the area of transportation. One would not believe that lives actually get transformed when you're working on an issue of social justice and equity for all of our people, so we can have affordable transportation and have transportation that's accessible at all times, day and night. Thank you, Carmen and Bob, for joining us tonight. Would you please introduce yourselves for our viewers?
Hi, I'm Carmen Angeldretti, and I've been riding the bus for over 20 years, as well as the BART system. And I have enjoyed getting involved in transportation justice, starting in 2008 through the handshake of BOSS and Urban Habitat. And I have strived forward into the ACE organization, which has the Riders for Transit Justice. And we are constantly on the buses and on the ground talking to the people about bus transportation, what we can do about getting ridership up, and how to keep the fares down, as well as the other problems like the stroller action we did in February, the getting the fares to stay at the same BV measure that we did in 2008.
So you're becoming quite an expert in the field.
Right.
It was quite some time when we met.
Yeah.
And you were just beginning to dream the dream of being engaged in the community, of becoming a social justice warrior. So I'm so pleased to have you in the studio with us tonight.
I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Bob?
I'm Bob Allen. I direct the Transportation Justice Program at Urban Habitat, and we're a 20-plus-year-old environmental justice organization that works on issues of regionalism, race, transportation, and land use. We were founded by Carl Anthony, who I think a lot of people know was a major figure in the environmental justice movement, really to take a critical look again at issues of race and class within the mainstream environmental movement and focus on the relationship that cities have from a regional perspective. And one of the first people I met when I came here about 6.5 years ago was you, Boona, when you were working at BOSS. And we had the opportunity to work together along with public advocates to help form and lay the groundwork for the Riders for Transit Justice. We sought out a group, a grassroots organizing group. Eventually that group was ACE. And I know we'll talk about this later.
Can you tell us what ACE stands for?
ACE is the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment. And they're a grassroots group, member-based group working in Richmond, Oakland, and in San Francisco, and throughout the state of California, really trying to put riders at the center of transportation funding, planning, and decision-making. So that's been a really important part of our work, and that's something that we worked with on BOSS.
And you just told me you just came back from India.
I did.
And I was just there not long ago. Things that I was really struck by is how much work is being done on creating more public transportation. You know, more buses are being added, more, you know, the metro in New Delhi is, you know, a dream come true for someone like me who now totally gets lost in my own city where I grew up. What brought you to this movement?
I think, I grew up in a working class community outside of Philadelphia in New Jersey, and, I didn't really understand at the time, but everyone wanted a car, even if they couldn't afford one. And looking back at the time, there was a stigma attached, especially to riding the bus. And I didn't really have a political analysis, but the people who rode the rail to Philadelphia, the commuters, they had one type of transit and a different set of amenities versus the folks who rode the bus in communities like Camden, New Jersey, one of the poorest cities and one of the most disinvested places in the United States. And I remember taking note of that as I would ride in from the suburbs of New Jersey through different communities. Who rode what kind of transit? And I never really understood it, but clearly there was an inequality and a disparity to those types of transit and the ridership.
And does that break out along class, economic status, where you live?
I think it does.
Give us a little more on how the class plays a role. You said that earlier, and then I really want to also get into the environmental side, because a lot of people don't realize that having good, affordable transit systems will save the planet.
I talk often in transportation about choice riders versus the transit dependent, and choice riders being folks who may have a car or lifestyle reasons choose not to drive. And I think you don't have to be a transportation planner here in the Bay Area to take a look around and look at who rides which systems. You're on Caltrain in the Peninsula going down to Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. It's a very different type of worker going down to work in the tech sector. If you're riding an AC transit bus with, it's predominantly people of color, low-income riders, those are folks who don't have the opportunity or the option to have an automobile. And they have to rely on the bus service, mm-hmm. which often isn't adequate enough. And in BART, we have a mix of people, depending upon whether it's BART in the suburbs or in the urban core.
Carmen, we were talking a little bit about your passion for transportation, and you mentioned your work with ACE. Can you tell us more about how the Bus Riders Union, it's called something different now.
Riders for Transit Justice.
Riders for Transit Justice is going. How large is the membership?
Well, the membership is about 1,000, and we have over 500 postcards that were turned in for the Don't Raise the Fares program, and we managed to not get the fares raised for July 1st. So we have been meeting almost 2 Thursdays out of the month to discuss how we can get membership up, how we can get ridership up, how we can get more people from our cards that we have to come into the meetings and be a part of it. And we've got 2 new members, and we've got elections coming up for president and secretary and vice president. So we're doing a lot of going out and speak to people on the buses. Next week we have actions, and we're going to I'm coming to Berkeley to talk to the people about the bus ridership and becoming mm-hmm. a member of Riders for Transit Justice. And I'll have my clipboard, so I'll be on the bus and I'll inform the bus driver about what I'm doing, and so they will not feel uncomfortable. And what we're doing is we're also looking for ways to raise money for the Riders for Transit Justice. Mm-hmm. And right now we haven't come up with anything, but we're looking forward to meeting next week, no, not next week, but week after next, to discuss this. So we have a lot of ideas.
So you've become a leader in...
Not a leader, just...
Yeah. Bob is nodding his head here. Come on, let's establish that. I'm seeing you as a leader.
I'm a leader, yes, I'm a leader, but...
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bob, let's talk a little bit about, the different communities that mm-hmm. use transit, and how sometimes, they're clearly divided by where they live, what kind of transit they use. And I know that you've looked at this issue quite a bit.
Yeah, I think what we see when we look at the different types of transit, BART, Caltrain, bus systems like AC Transit, is on how they're funded and the level of subsidy. And by subsidy, I mean you get on the bus and you pay your fare. And the bus fare only pays for part of the cost, to fuel the bus, to pay the driver, the mechanics, all the things we need to do to make transit work. But above that fare, there's this concept of subsidy, and we pay this, all the time in society. Lots of things are subsidized. Some things that we don't like maybe the defense budget. Things that are good, like public transit. But there's a real disparity and a difference in the amount of subsidy you get for something like a public ferry trip versus, say, making transit free in San Francisco. So, for example, last year we were really privileged to be part of a campaign led by the group Power in San Francisco, which is a grassroots organizing group.
Yes, incredible work.
Incredible organization, works in the Bayview, Mission Hunters Point along with a coalition of groups like the Chinatown Community Development Center, Jamestown Center, and the Youth Commission in San Francisco, supported by Supervisor David Campos, that ran a campaign that was really designed to say, hey, youth in San Francisco, we're cutting yellow school bus service, we're cutting access to opportunity. We really ought to be trying to expand access to opportunity so kids can have a right to the city. They can get to school, they can get to after work or after school programs, to all the things the city has to offer. The campaign was really interesting because we were able to show the grassroots members, the bus riders who Power is organizing by getting on the bus, that, you know, if you fund a new ferry that we decided to fund at the regional level, and the regional level I mean the Metropolitan Transportation Commission.
And how many counties is that?
9-county Bay Area, one of the biggest agencies no one knows about. They essentially handle $250 billion of transit funding for a long-range plan that lasts 25 years. They make a lot of important decisions.
Who do they have to be transparent to if they're that big? I mean,
yeah, they're not, unfortunately not many people, because the board of the MTC consists of locally elected officials who serve at the regional level. So their accountability really is to people back home to bring highway money.
Are these city council members or board of supervisors?
Both.
Both.
So often city council folks like Mayor Tom Bates, county supervisors. And as you said, Boona, there's not real accountability because no one knows what this agency does. But their funding decisions, like their decision last year to fund a ferry from South San Francisco to Alameda County, primarily to get workers to Genentech, a multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 company, for a ferry project that may be good 10 or 15 years out, they were able to provide enough funding to subsidize ferry riders who are overwhelmingly wealthy, middle-class folks, mostly white, to take a trip from South San Francisco to Alameda every day at a cost above the cost of the fare on the ferry of about $100. Let me repeat that, $100 a trip, round-trip subsidy. At the same time...
Can you tell us what the subsidy might be for AC Transit?
It's a great question. So we were trying to get, that was about $30 million that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission gave out for this project. And again, a subsidy of round trip of about $100 per trip. At the same time, we were trying to get $3 million from the region, $3 to $4 million, to make transit free for a 16-month pilot program so that 40 to 45,000 kids a day in San Francisco could get to school, get to jobs, get to after-work programs. And it was a fight to the death to get a package of about $8.5, $9 million for 40,000 kids at a subsidy of maybe 50 cents or less a trip.
I thought you were going to say at a negative subsidy.
Very small subsidy, if at all, for these kinds of bus systems. The big capital projects, like some of the BART expansions and extensions, have a huge subsidy. But the operating subsidy for AC Transit is very low. But I think it's really important to point out that one of the reasons we have bad planning decisions is when we don't have the real experts, like people like Carmen, at the center of the planning process. And you were involved when you were at BOSS with forming this Riders for Transit Justice. We've all been inspired, I think, by a lot of the work that the Bus Riders Union in Los Angeles has done.
I remember that time.
Forming a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of bus riders. Eric Mann at the Bus Riders Union talks about the bus as a factory on wheels. And it's really a great place to organize people for a political project. So we've been inspired by their work to work with groups like Power, ACE, and BOSS in the Bay Area to say that the real experts in transportation planning are people like Carmen, people who rely on transit every day. They know what they need. The question is, will the decision makers like the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, with a very undemocratic and unrepresentative governance structure, listen to the real experts?
And Carmen, have you felt that when you show up with other people and have something to say to the folks who are making decisions, that you're beginning to have more influence and they're paying more attention to you?
Yes, we met personally with one-on-one board members of AC Transit and have gotten good feedback and some not good feedback. But the main thing was that they recognize us. They know that we're an organization that makes a and that we are on the buses campaigning to get better bus service, to return the bus system back to 2010 levels when we had more buses on the road. And
Does either one of you know what those cuts did and how many lost?
Well, AC Transit had a 15%, they had a 7% cut, then an 8% cut right after the recession. So in 2008, when tax revenues plummeted, when the economy was tanked by Wall Street, there's no reserve fund for transit operators. They still have to pay for fuel and drivers, but they don't have the same amount of tax revenue to pay for those that service. And when service is cut, people like Carmen obviously are most impacted.
Yeah.
Drivers lose their jobs.
And I was going to ask you, in terms of to get to every place that you need to get to on public transportation, do you have to sort of plan out your day depending on what time the bus comes, and plan out your appointments? I mean, does it make life harder to not have easy access?
Fortunately for me, I live in Oakland. Bus service is good for me where I am. But for my constituents and friends that live in Hayward and Fremont, who live in Castro Valley, living out of Mita, the service is hurting them. They have to get up 2 hours early just to get to a doctor's appointment, to go to school, to do grocery shopping. And it takes forever for the bus to come because now the buses are not running as often as they used to. So people are having a hard time, and these are the people that we need to have come to these meetings and speak out about their own plights, about getting around. And that's why I decided to take Berkeley as a source to see just how good the service is in Berkeley next week, to go out and see what they're going to say about bus service.
Yeah, we clearly need some bus routes that are not covered now that people need to use to get where they need to get to. And if you're disabled and you're dropped off at a certain point, you can't always make it to where you want to go because it's difficult.
Right.
And we definitely need some more routes covered in Berkeley. So we'll have you come back and tell us about what's really going on in Berkeley. Okay. Bob, I wanted to talk with you a little bit in terms of give me a vision of what transportation would be like if we didn't have all these discrepancies between who gets what and who deserves what.
A vision for what a just and equitable transportation system would look like in the Bay Area, which we don't have, unfortunately, right now. I think it starts with a few things. It would start with the needs of the community. And any kind of planning for that vision of transportation justice would start with listening to people like Carmen. Particularly, we focus on bus riders because, again, they are the folks who don't have the option to say, you know what, the system's not great, I'm going to buy an automobile and I'm going to opt out. They have to rely on it. And now at the regional level and throughout the Bay Area, we're telling people to do the quote-unquote right thing. Take more transit, live in more dense neighborhoods in the kind of inner core of the Bay Area. But a really just system would provide 24-hour, round-the-clock, reliable service. When you walk out, the bus is going to be there within 1 or 2 minutes of the schedule. It would have good, what they call headways, meaning the bus comes every 8 or 10 minutes. You don't have to wait out there 20 or 30 minutes for a bus. It would be safe. It would have good shelters, good lighting, bus benches, all the things that train riders have at train stations. And it would provide access to all the opportunities in the Bay Area, whether that's school, work, recreation, political activity, whatever people want to access. And to do that, we have to flip the priorities in terms of what we're funding. And right now, we're not doing that. But I think we know from talking to the riders like Carmen, talking to our allies around the country, what a just system looks like. It would also have to.
Where would you say compare us to some country where you feel that the transportation system works for everybody?
I think,
are there models around?
I think there are. I think in terms of urban areas, I think it's hard because, U.S. is a big country.
Yeah.
There's differences between what people are dealing with the suburbs and the cities. I would say this. If we look at the latest census data, we hear a lot of talk about the suburbanization of poverty.
Yes, we do.
Because of gentrification and because of all the pressure, especially if you look at African-American population in San Francisco down to, I think, below 6% now. People now being pushed out of Oakland into to further and deeper into the East Bay, into Contra Costa County. We know that, increasingly people in the suburbs are also going to need transit. So, I think there are good models in terms of very dense urban areas in Europe, the way they run transit. But I think the challenge for the U.S. is we have a lot of people in the suburbs now who are going to need transit access too. And because of climate change, because of our attempt to deal with greenhouse gases and some of the climate change legislation we have in California, the regional agencies like the Metropolitan Transportation Commission have a plan to focus more people living in places like San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. Now, the concern around that is it's going to put a lot of pressure on real estate values in an already very unaffordable region. So the question is, what are we going to do for people in Oakland who are not choice riders? As more people move in, as they have different demands for transit, how are we going to have a model that meets the needs of the people who have been here, that we don't displace them through gentrification, and we provide transit for what they need? There's a lot of great studies that show when you move wealthier people into what's called transit-oriented development, or TOD, essentially housing near transit, BART or
like
AC. Exactly. What's really interesting is when you move upper-income people in there, the transit service, those folks don't have to take transit. It's a lifestyle choice. They like being in the city.
And it also impacts the community with all these more cars coming in and no parking.
And already, and I guess my point was, already historically impacted communities like West Oakland that are living between the port and everything else that they're dealing with, and groups like Ditching Dirty Diesel are focusing on. So, a vision for justice in the region would look at everything we've done since the end of World War II, redlining, funding the highway system that fuels suburbia, racial covenants that kept people of color out of these new suburban neighborhoods, cheap mortgage loans so that people could leave the cities and go to the suburbs. And these things were conscious policies.
Yeah, they were, and they impacted a lot of people who really didn't understand the financial system, given the best of information. So we have families, at least in my community, in the South Asian community, people bought property, further out of urban cities, and are now finding out, since the crash and the foreclosures and everything, that their homes are worth less than what they owe. They've had to sell their cars. The older members of their families can't get anywhere, so they're extremely isolated, and nobody's thinking about, how do we reach out to folks so they can be part of the... And if people can't get to jobs, then that's a whole other issue. You think you found a better life, you move away, and then the economy tanks, and then you need to do job search, and by that time you've had to sell some of your resources. So, and there's no transportation, and you can't get to work, and it just deepens poverty.
And that's the structural situation we find ourselves in. People doing the drive to qualify. Now their home, as you said, is underwater. Now they can't drive because they had to get rid of their car, and there's lousy transit service.
Right.
And if there is transit service, it might be a BART station, which can get you into the inner part of the Bay Area, but it can't do all the little trips you need to live, to go to the grocery store, to go to a doctor's appointment, to take your kids to daycare. So I think we've got a lot of challenges in terms of where people have been displaced to and from. And again, going forward with this vision for climate change, where we don't want to sprawl, we don't want to repeat the patterns that were inequitable and also bad for the climate that we did after World War II in this country with the great suburban kind of development, which wasn't so great for people of color and low-income people as we had white flight. Now that a lot of people have, quote-unquote, rediscovered cities as great places to live, for all the people who've been living there with years of disinvestment, what are we going to do to provide transit to meet their needs? And I think it's a huge challenge. One of the solutions is having the riders organized, politically conscious about the history, the connection to the civil rights movement, the Freedom Riders.
Yes.
A. Philip Randolph and fighting, separate but equal. And that whole trajectory of the civil rights movement, the reason transit's at the center of it is because it's about access to opportunity.
So Carmen, where do you see yourself going forward in terms of, are there issues that you feel that you are curious to see that, some good comes out of the work that the writers are doing?
Yes, I am. I'm going to go before the board with the rest of the ACE Riders for Transit Justice, and we go before the board, we're going to speak about the plight of the riders and what they're going through, how they react to the bus driver who's rude to them, how they react to the way that we go about our everyday lives of getting up in the morning and trying to get a bus to get there on time. You know, what they had to do, the disabled person who has to worry about his wheelchair being that came out, they just bought from a bus business in Hayward, and they got the buses out there. They showed us how they looked. They had them parked down by the AC Transit building, and we toured it, and we discovered that the clipper machine is now on the right side instead of the left side. Well, that was a problem for one of our bus riders who's blind, because they now have to get on that bus. Whenever they get on the new bus, they got to go to the right instead of to the left. So that was a problem, and now
But if you folks hadn't been there,
yeah,
you know, that would have continued.
Right. So there's different aspects of AC Transit that we're working to get the wheels rolling to improve conversation between us and the board members.
What do you see for the next 5 years?
Well, I think we have a lot of opportunities as we have more people seeing transit as a real key issue, and we have more organized folks with ACE in the East Bay and AC Transit and now Power and some of the groups working in San Francisco. I think we have the opportunity to build a real movement across the Bay Area, because the only way to make some of these regional actors, political actors, do what the community wants them to do is if you can get to them politically where they live locally. So I think that's the real opportunity, is this movement building piece that Carmen and folks are at the center of. And if we can keep that momentum going, opportunity to really change the landscape, to have a transit system that meets the needs of the people who rely on it first, and deal with increasing issues of gentrification, displacement, and this concept of a right to the city. I think we can have more of a people-centered movement. But you know, as movements go, it takes a long time.
It takes a
lot of energy.
I remember when we started, we thought, oh yeah, 1 year, you know, we can do this. And learns by experience that movements take at least a generation sometimes to really take momentum. What's in your future?
Well, I think right now, I want to see, you know, what the next 5 years holds, as we said, for the for this movement building piece. I think we've seen some video. We'll see some video about the grassroots groups' engagement in the process. And I think, you know, my goal has always been that I'm not at the center of these debates, that I'm providing support to the groups in a way, and organizations like Urban Habitat can support those local groups, but that those groups are increasingly out in front, which I think they are now. Yeah. So we've got to that point where the real experts are out in front and we can support them. So I think what's next is trying to figure out how we can grow that base and deepen both our political knowledge and our political education work and expand the movement.
So if you were to say 3 things to a non-transit person, somebody who's dependent on a car, and you wanted them to really become engaged in this issue, what are the 3 things that you would say to them? Why? Why should I, you know, not use my car 5 times a day, and you know what's in it for me to join in with Carmen and stand by Carmen's side and say, you know, you need to also look at this. You mentioned the environmental issue.
I mean, I think clearly the climate crisis is at the center. We can't have people in single cars driving out from suburbs and continue that kind of pattern of sprawl. So if you take the climate crisis seriously, we've got to get people out of their cars. At the same time, we've got to be aware of and thinking about who rides which systems and how we're investing in those. And you know, that's an issue that groups like ACE and Power are really starting to lift up in terms of this concept of transit justice. So I think those are the really essential things. And then even down to little things like, you know, getting people who drive to think about, you know, why is parking free? I always talk to my friends in San Francisco and say, you know, how much does a residential parking permit cost so you can park in your neighborhood? They'll say about $90, $100 for the year. The transit pass costs, I think, about San Francisco. A month.
A month, yeah. I was going to say.
So getting people to think about the hidden costs and the subsidies and who pays for what kinds of transit is really important. The other big thing we've got going is as people are driving more fuel-efficient cars, that's meaning less revenue and less money for transit. So we're going to be in a space within the next generation where we're having a hard time funding transit. We're going to have to come up with creative ways. So for the policy people who are involved with transit funding, we're going to have to think of different ways to fund it. But that only comes about if people are conscious of, yeah, parking is free. Well, you know, there's a cost to having free parking, and you know, there are a lot of things that aren't free in our society, and they have costs. So I think that's the direction we want to go in.
And for me, common sense would say, you know, subsidize people who don't have instead of subsidizing people who do have. If you have a home, you know, you have one of the biggest subsidies. And many paradigms will have to shift for us to see that,
absolutely,
that vision that all of us are very engaged in trying to make it come true. Carmen, any last words of wisdom for us? What do you need from the community to do your work?
I need the community to come out to ACE's, when we have our next fundraiser, come out and support us, because you're also supporting the Rise to Transit Justice. We're providing a way for you to have a bus by focusing on AC Transit, going to the MTC meetings. That's the Metropolitan Transit Commission in San Francisco, which moved from Oakland and made it harder for us to get there. But go to the meetings that have, community meetings that AC Transit has, and get out there and speak about your plights with everyday riding on the bus, and let the board hear what you have to say about everything.
Well, any last words before the videos that we're going to see at the end of the show? Can you say a little bit more about what we might be seeing?
I think we're seeing the beginning of that movement we talked about, you know, increasing numbers of riders showing up at meetings, and not people like me who are, you know, to be honest, like paid advocates who work at nonprofits, which is an important part of the movement.
There is a role for you.
Which is a role for us.
You know, best advocates also need solid, good information.
And we need that.
Back us up.
But I think what we'll see in the videos is what happens when the real constituents and the riders are showing up, whether it's ACE showing up to talk about this long-range regional transportation plan and saying, how can we spend $250 billion, I'll repeat that, $250 billion in the region over 25 years on transit and still have less transit service than we did in the 1980s, or higher fares, or less, you know, fewer routes, or less access to opportunity. And or when you see kids from San Francisco showing up at this thing called MTC, which they had no idea what it was 3 years ago.
It's a very powerful institution.
But showing up and saying, you need to listen to me. You need to provide funds to help us run this pilot program, and what happens when they're ignored. And I think that's what's really compelling in these videos, is seeing people engaging with power in a deep way, powerful institutions that are not used to them showing up. And I will leave you with this quote. One of the commissioners basically said, we don't want you to get your expectations up. So we don't want to provide funding because we might not be able to sustain it. Instead of saying, we want to provide funding and we're going to do everything we can to sustain it, we don't want to get your expectations up. And what I heard was, we don't want that, because then a bunch of black and brown and working class transit-dependent people, if they actually think they can get something from the region one time or bus ride be better, they actually might start showing up at these meetings at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday when everyone's at work. So I think that's the real, you know, fear that the decision makers have. People will actually start paying attention, and they'll actually start demanding investments that improve the lives of those people who rely on transit the most. And that's what they fear, and that's what we want to actually see come to fruition.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. It's great to see you, and good luck in your work. And you know, you have my support. Come back when you have some other issues coming up, and we'd be happy to sit down and chat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Boona.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you.
Last 3 years, I have been a youth leader with Jamestown Community Center through a group called Youth in Charge. While at Jamestown, Youth in Charge has been working on figuring out how to make Muni more accessible for youth. I'm here today because I am a youth and I can relate to kids having to worry about fare to get on the bus to school. I have a younger sister that attends School of the Arts, and worrying about money for bus fare for both her and I is a burden on our family. The increased cost of Muni is especially hard for my family because we are on a fixed income. If one of us happens to not buy a fare, we are also at risk to get fined by fare inspectors, which is a much greater burden. Although I just graduated from high school, as a high schooler I was expected to get myself to and from school. In addition, the school district has cut yellow school buses and is expecting to cut more in the next 3 years. This means that many elementary school students and middle school students must depend on Muni to get to and from school. It is not fair that because of these cuts, families should have to spend extra money to send their kids to school. Every kid has a right to an education. Why should we be burdened and punished by getting ticketed for not being able to afford Muni? It is important for everyone to realize that youth deserve the right to ride Muni for free. I believe now is as good of a time as any to provide free Muni for all youth. The economy is bad, we are losing families in San Francisco, and youth deserve to get to school with no hassle. Thank you.
I'm the lead organizer for the Amalgamated Transit Union 192. I am also a member of the Genesis Transportation Task Force, and I live here in the Bay Area. We are part of the 6 Wins for Social Equity Network. We stand together with the public as advocates. Urban Habitat, ACE, St. Mary's Center, People Acting in Community Together, PACT of San Jose, New Voices Are Rising, and the UULM. We are here today to deliver a report card to the MTC and ABAG. We give them a D that stands for deeply disappointed. We are deeply disappointed that there was not enough political will to push for the policies that will ensure fairness. For 18 months, all of us here have been working with the MTC and ABAG to ensure that we have an equity agenda.
That's right.
Yes, we are deeply disappointed. As a transit provider and a member of the union, I truly believe this is a civil rights issue. I see the faces of the families who are transit dependent and know that we must keep fighting to be heard.
That's right.
As Rosa Parks said, the only thing that bothered me was that we waited so long to make this protest. We are joined together because of our fates depend on action and our unity. I stand here today with others to speak up and speak out. Our first speaker is Mr. Warren Cushman of the Disability Action Network.
I'm very deeply disappointed with how this process has gone for the past year and a half. Many have tried very hard to engage this policy discussion on affordable housing issues, on public transit issues, on a variety of social equity issues, and clearly the MTC is not listening.
That's right.
I stand here very discouraged about this process and feel that we've got to take some very strong steps to send a message to the MTC and to the community that we're not going to allow this to continue.
Yeah.
Yes. People with disabilities are transit-dependent riders. People with disabilities need buses. They need transit to work. They need buses in the evenings. They need buses on the weekends. They need more funding for buses. We've seen a slash and burn policy over the past several years in all our 9 counties when it comes to the workhorse of the system, which is our buses.
That's right.
And we are very concerned that the MTC is not doing its job when it comes to our buses. We want more funding for buses, and we want to restore all the cuts that we've suffered in this region when it comes to our buses.
Yeah.
Yes.
In addition, people with disabilities are having to live 3 and 4 to a household and cannot afford to live in the Bay Area. I actually have a friend right now who has been given a 30-day notice and will be homeless at the end of the month, and he has nowhere to go. We have to do something about affordable housing, and we need ABAG to do its job on affordable housing.
Yeah.
People with disabilities need to have a place to live, and we need to have a place. We live everywhere, not just in the traditional arenas where people are building affordable housing. We need to have affordable housing everywhere, including places that don't traditionally reflect affordable housing.
That's right.
So we're asking MTC to do its job to build affordable housing everywhere, and for people who live in those areas that don't reflect affordable housing to stand with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Warren. And our next speaker will be Amy Fishman of EBHO.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm with East Bay Housing Organizations. We're a coalition of groups who care about affordable housing in the East Bay. Do you all care about affordable housing?
Yes!
Do you think that people need affordable housing in the East Bay?
Yes!
How many of you know someone who's been foreclosed out of their home?
Yes!
How many of of you know someone who's been homeless or at risk of homelessness?
Yes!
How many of you know someone that's spending too much of their hard-earned money on rent?
Yes!
How many of you know someone that has to make hard choices between putting food on the table, health care for their kids, getting to their job, whatever it is, because they're paying too much for their rent?
Yes!
We need affordable housing. There's a crisis today. It's worse today than ever before. Some people say, oh, the affordable housing crisis is solved because look at all the foreclosed homes out there. The prices have dropped. Is that really true?
No!
In fact, rents are higher. The pressures on the housing market's higher. The housing market is broken. So that's why we need the public intervention. We need public policies from ABAG and MTC. We need a regional approach to solve problems. Where should affordable housing be?
Everywhere!
Everywhere. And it should be close to jobs, right?
Yes!
It should be close to services, right?
Yes!
It should be close to transit.
Yes!
So we're saying that low-income communities and communities of color shouldn't be pushed out to the peripheries of our communities where they're forced to commute long distances to their jobs and services. And what happens when they do that? What happens to our roads when people are pushed out to the peripheries? Gridlock, crowded, traffic. What happens to the environment?
Dirty.
Trash.
More greenhouse gases, right? So the way to solve this problem is to make sure that every community has its fair share so that we can be equitable, we can be sustainable, and we can make sure that the future is good for all of us in the East Bay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is going to be Davila Irvin of New Voices Are Rising.
So, my name is Davila Irvin, and I am deeply disappointed by the threat of displacement and gentrification. Reversing sprawl and focusing transportation investment and new development are key strategies to reducing greenhouse gases. But at the same time, it is important to remember that the areas identified as priority development areas are important parts of cities where low-income residents are vulnerable to being displaced. Living in Oakland, I have known many people who found themselves forced to leave their neighborhoods when new developments cleaned up or improved our neighborhoods at the expense of these residents. In the past 5 years, the culture and identity of my West Oakland neighborhood has drastically changed, and the people I grew up with are now looking for places to live, sometimes moving to more polluted parts of the city, sometimes moving further out into the suburbs where housing is less expensive. As plans for new construction in these areas become a reality, I fear that renting homes in our neighborhoods will be out of reach for those who have grown up there, as these same neighborhoods catch the attention of those persons who have not historically found these areas attractive. I call on the agencies to revise their proposed plan to avoid displacement of current residents, including increasing affordable housing and adding strategies to retain businesses that serve the existing community. Without careful, conscious planning, more low-income residents will be pushed out to less attractive and more polluted parts of the city. Plan Bay area should be providing solutions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Norman. And I believe in one Bay Area for all.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Whose Bay Area?
Our Bay Area.
Whose Bay Area?
Our Bay Area.
Mic check.
Mic check. Check.
We are here to stand up.
We are here to stand up.
We are here to speak out.
We are here to speak out.
We have sat at the table.
We have sat at the table
for 1.5 years.
For 1.5 years.
You need to remember.
You need to remember.
This is our table.
This is our table.
This is our table.
This is our table.
Protect communities.
Protect communities.
From displacement.
From displacement.
Affordable home for everyone.